prior apprentice who reached out to me and said he was applying for a job, and he asked me for some guidelines to some of the requirements that were listed in the security research position he was interested in. So I thought I would take a few minutes and just talk through these and talk about a couple of things that are probably the most relevant, or what they may be asking for when they talk about a requirement. In this case, they listed it as what you bring, so it's a nice way to just say that instead of saying requirement. And I've listed out the items that are from that section in this job request. I'm not going to talk about who it is because I don't think that's relevant, but it is interesting to talk about the items that they're asking about. So in this case, the very first one is 3+ years of experience in software development, network, or systems administration. Now this is very common, where you'll see in a job application online, they're looking for someone who has X amount of years. A lot of times these are written and reutilized and kind of merged from multiple different job descriptions. And sometimes what's there doesn't always match as you go throughout it. In this case, it's pretty well done. 3 years indeed, and they've listed 3 areas, so it could be a hint that they want a year or more experience in each one, or it could just be that they're looking for someone who has that amount of experience over those 3 areas. You could probably get away with including other areas. So if you haven't done software development, but you've coded on the side, obviously you could talk about that in place of software development. But if you had 3 years of network experience, you could then expand that and say you do have network experience. Maybe you hadn't looked at software development or systems administration, but you could still apply elements from your past to what they're looking for. So really, as I mentioned there, don't feel constrained to only the listed areas. Bring in things that seem relevant, that seem connected, and apply anything that you believe in your background, including freelance experience, that would really apply here. Just be ready to justify / talk about anything that you bring up. Never bring up anything that you're not ready to actually speak to. That's the quickest way to sink in an interview. Let's move on to the next one. I've broken these out into different pages so we can focus on just the notes. The next one is proficiency in building microservice-based data sources to provide data collection, to support data collection. Now, key word here is microservice. That's not necessarily a normal item in cybersecurity or threat intelligence, though it has its place, obviously. Really, that's a fancy way to say that you have multiple services running, and each service has its own data store, i.e. its own database that it's saving data into. No 2 services share the same data store. So you might have a automation pulling 50,000 hashes from VirusTotal every morning, and simultaneously have a gigantic Splunk instance that's pulling in 1 million hashes. Those 2 would not talk to each other. They'd have completely separate services, completely separate ways to reach them. Or you may have something much smaller, like you have a phishing kit discovery mechanism running in, say, a Linux virtual machine hosted in DigitalOcean or something equivalent, and it's pulling data in its service and its data store completely separate than everything else. Many times when you do that, you create data stores and services that are only accessible by their own unique API, and each one has their own API that you would call. In some cases you use CORS, which is short for Command Query Responsibility and Segregation Language. This, again, not normal, but not bad, not hard. Really, the key things to remember is everything has its own separate data, and to bring it all back together, you have to have another location that will join it. Unlike a SQL database, or even a SQLite database, or any kind of SQL, or even NoSQL for that matter. But anyway, you don't have an easy way to join. You have to pull everything to another location, do any kind of joining, and kind of merge, say, pull the result of one data out of another. Any of those normal database relational actions you would have to do somewhere else when you have this kind of microservice-based data source. And like I said, it's kind of a non-normal topic, so I've got some research suggestions here for you. Microservices.io is a good place to go, and there's an Nginx series of articles that really break down microservices and how they're useful. I would definitely want to be smart on these going into it, even if what I think they're looking for isn't what I ended up researching. Having a deeper background in microservices can't hurt, and you can speak to the things you do know. So it's always a wise thing to find out exactly, if you can, what they're looking for, and then speak to that if you know it, and if you don't, find something relative or adjacent to it and talk about that so you can demonstrate experience and understanding. And that can also often swing an interview in ways that if you just say you don't know something, it will kill it. All right, the next one is the ability to solve problems with common industry cloud solutions and tools. That one's kind of a head scratcher for me. It's a very broad generic statement that is difficult to gauge what they're actually asking for. So this is one where if I was going into this interview myself, I would ask them flat out, what are you talking about here? What's your reference? Because it could be a signal that they're looking for you to have experience in using things that are in AWS, right, in Amazon Web Services, or off your premises in large scale kind of enterprise level, either data ingestion or data analysis, or it could be something completely different. It's too difficult to tell from that statement. I suspect, having written these myself in the past and having gone through many of these, this is emergent from another job description, or they're purposely not talking about the technology so that they don't show their hand that they're looking for something very, very specific. Because that can be good or bad when you're an interviewer. And so this is something I definitely bring up and ask during the interview, even if they don't bring it up, because it shows that you read things and you have interest in what was going on. Now this other one, demonstrated aptitude in task automation. When you see the word demonstrated, they want you to show somehow, either in the interview or have something online in a public place that demonstrates that you can perform this, in this case, task automation. Now, if you have script or tools up in GitHub, perfect. You can point them to that. When you send in your resume, you can attach that as a link or something of that nature to give them a way to pre-look at things if they'd like to. And if they don't, you can always, if you're ready and you're comfortable, you can always say, let me show you. There's nothing wrong. In fact, it's often, again, something that swings an interview in a positive way if you can demonstrate during the actual interview what your aptitude is. So my favorite go-to is personally a Jupyter notebook, because it organizes things both visually and yet shows my coding skills at the same time. And you don't have to go out and make something new or something unique. There's actually plenty of Jupyter notebooks out there that are either set for cybersecurity or set for threat intelligence that you could pull out and demonstrate and use. Mystic is one that I would consider, but start with just Jupyter itself. And I've got some links for you here later. Another thing you could do is if you were working in a SOC and you're looking at this particular position, you might talk about the SOAR items that you've used, like a Demistio or something of that nature. Security orchestration, automation, and response. It's a fancy way to say that you've automated a playbook so that you've taken out things that don't necessarily require a human element that can be automated. You use a SOAR to kind of take care of those tasks. Worst comes to worst, Zapier, which is pretty easy to set up, pretty easy to get access to, and very inexpensive if not free, or just totally free with If Then This That, which is another super favorite of mine. All you have to do is demonstrate your aptitude. Pulling out one of your If Then This That recipes and showing how you automate news, or you automate something to Feedly, or you do processing in some fashion will meet this request. You can even go to Bash, Python, or Ruby. Something that you have written or something that you use demonstrates aptitude. That's what they're looking for. And I've got some links down there at the bottom. If you're not familiar with Jupyter, go to jupyter.org and pull down the notebooks. Go to GitHub, do a search for Jupyter. You'll find tons of notebooks that you can take advantage of. Zapier, go to Zapier. If you've built websites or had a blog or something of that nature, this might be something you're already familiar with. And of course, If Then This That is a wonderful tool that you can have on your phone and iPad, computer, and whatnot, and have it do things while you sleep. I use If Then This That to do a lot of task automation that needs to run while I'm not paying attention to it. And I highly encourage you to do similar things like that. It's a time saver, and demonstrating efficiency is really what they're asking for here. Now this next one, fundamental knowledge of network and web related protocols. They give a couple examples. You want to know those at a minimum. But honestly, this is a request for you to show them that you understand how the domain name system works. You understand DNS, you know its ins and outs, you know how things come together, how IPs relate to websites and domains, and who owns them and who doesn't, how registrars work, how hosting providers work, how a criminal might gain access to IPs and host malware or phishing or whatever they might want. They are looking for you to be able to demonstrate that information and the web protocols that uses. So TCP, IP, and UDP, HTTP, HTTPS, and so on, all easy protocols relating to DNS. REST is a reference to an API, and since they're talking microservices and automation, it's a good hint or a huge signal, if you will, that they use a lot of APIs. So if you can roll out that you understand APIs and have a good background in them, this is a quick way to win. Now, I've provided some links. If you're not familiar with these terms, one, I would reconsider possibly going to this position because they're not looking for a brand new person, but it never hurts to go through and do a review to make sure you understand all the idiosyncrasies of HTTPS, HTTP, and so on. So I've got some links there for you as well. Not everybody uses APIs, so it's definitely worth taking the time to touch on those. Now this one's a tough one. Diverse range of security experience at an enterprise level. That's the key word right there. Enterprise level. And then they break down information, application, network, and research. That's 4 different areas. You're not going to cram all that into one. Don't let this one trip you. Don't let this one hold you back. That's a tough one to just speak to, period. But really what they're saying is we want someone who is not an individual researcher, who is not working for a small company and has only worked for a small company, but has worked for an MSP, worked for a managed security provider or managed security services provider, has worked at an enterprise, like a big company. So think Bank of America or Giant Hospital or large construction company, and been in the information department or been in the application dev or application security department, been in the networking part, been in a NOC, been in a SOC, those kind of things. They're looking for that kind of experience. Now, key here, even if you don't have that experience, again, reach out and find any lateral experience that you might have that could apply and discuss it, because you don't necessarily know how strong they want you to be in this area. This is probably a wanna, but not necessarily going to be a deal breaker if you don't have it, especially if you're strong in some of the other areas that they're looking for. Now this one here, speaking of strong understanding of common web application attacks, and they reference OWASP Top 10. I've got a link here for you. If you're not familiar with the OWASP Top 10, go look them up. It changes every year. Really, it talks about the top 10. You can dig into that yourself, but you should know these. These are the same things from SQL injection attacks to scripts to, basically abuses of services and hardware and software that we expose to the internet on a regular basis. So be familiar with those, because that's what the people that they obviously chase after in this particular position use. And so understanding them and understanding how vulnerabilities might creep into any of those areas can be something fun to talk to. Grab something from news, like right now, Hafnium is really popular. You could talk about an on-premises exchange issue, maybe talk about something you've done there, or just your understanding of it, and you could really have a win here. Now, another one is strong Linux fundamentals and the ability to analyze data with security tool sets. Now, there's 2 parts to this. Strong Linux fundamentals. Know your Linux. Now, what does that mean? Be able to show you're comfortable in a Linux environment. Install it into VirtualBox, install it and be comfortable setting it up, know how to open up terminal, know how to use bash, know where tools are laid out at, know how to add and remove tools, know how to do updates, be comfortable at the terminal, be comfortable using the GUI, troubleshoot networking, etc. That's showing that you know the fundamentals of Linux. Now, the ability to analyze data with security tool sets, this should have been broken into its own separate line, but they're implying and telling you that they do this likely inside of Linux. So again, if you're very comfortable in bash and shell, then you're going to be fine here. Many tool sets in Linux, such as Kali or things like that, if you can pull down Kali and understand it has a mile of tools, many of them help you understand either how NetFlow works or how files function and how to break them apart, how to look at them at different levels. Those are likely the tools they're referring to here. So open up a hex editor, have a hex editor under your belt. You should know what a hex editor is. Download and look at Kali. Get into the tools that are there. You don't have to look at all of them, but consider they might want to know, what common password cracking tools are, or how to look at Wi-Fi, or maybe they're interested in knowing if you understand Wireshark, right? Which is a tool to use to look at network traffic. Understand at least what some of these are. Have a few that you can pull out. Don't try to memorize them all, because Kali has 100 or 200 at least. Have a few that you know really well, or well enough that you can speak to, and pull those out and talk about how you utilize them to look at data. And if you want to practice, go find or create a couple thousand lines of even random words and figure out different things you can do with that. What patterns emerge from that? How could you combine or separate that data? How can you classify and categorize the data? All those are things that you can do with different tools on the Linux distros. If you can, know how to use awk, know how to use grep. These are fundamental bash commands that are very common that you use to search inside of files for grep, and awk helps you reorganize files. If you get time, learn sed, at least know what these are and be able to talk to them. They're some of the easiest tools that you can grab and demonstrate proficiency in data analysis using bash. I'll leave it there. Do some research, pull down Kali, and you can't lose there. Okay, familiarity with the fundamentals of a robust security program. This is just as bad as the other one, where they ask you to have common industry cloud solutions and tools. This one right here. This is a rough one because it's too broad. Really, they want to know that you have familiarity and understanding with a robust security program. What does that mean? Specifically, you have more than just a small company's view, an individual's view of what a security program is. Preferably, you've been in an information security department for a large enterprise. You've been in an MSSP or an MSP and had to deal with multiple companies and organizing what a security program looks like. Preferably, you've done so and it hasn't failed. But you can speak to that even if it has failed, because you can talk about how you handled incidents, which is always a win. But at a minimum, know that any good security program needs organization. There has to be documentation. You have to outline procedures, guidelines, standards, and so forth that you're adhering to. You have to have a means of enforcing it. And you have to have metrics and frameworks for risk, and also when, where, how, and so on to put security. That's part of a good security program. You know where your crown jewels are, which are your most valuable things in your company. You know what you're doing to protect it, both now and you have a roadmap to the future. All those are things that are part of a good/robust security program. If you can show working knowledge or past experience, that's best. Pulling out anything academic can be a killer here, so don't pull out something from school or something you learned on the internet necessarily. Be able to think through it and actually give as many thumbnail examples as you can. Okay, this is the toughest one in this whole thing to me, because this is one of the broadest topics. It's even worse than the common industry cloud solutions and security program, because this is both easy to understand and difficult because there's such a diverse amount of understanding out there, as everybody looks at their slice and says that represents the whole. And that can even be a topic for you if you like. But really, when they say in-depth knowledge of the underground scene and motivations of threat actors, they're talking about two core things. You have an idea, at least, how the criminal underground works. Now, that's a reference in many ways to Tor, the onion router, and the darknet that most people refer to it as well as I2P, BraveNet, Freenet, and a million other darknets that happen to exist. It can even include Telegram, Wicker, and Threema, and all the other encrypted chatting tools that allow you to create, even Discord for that matter, that allow you to create areas where people, criminal and otherwise, can come together and exchange information and perform actions. That is key to understand and key to demonstrate understanding that is the areas that people go to. There are markets, for example, on Tor that are basically criminal markets. They sell everything from drugs to people, and they sell malware and everything else. That is definitely there and definitely known, but in addition to that is a number of bazaars and shops and small areas, ClearNet and otherwise, that people go to do the same thing, to make transactions, to talk, to have communities, to interact with one another. Telegram is probably one of the easiest ways that people also interact. So knowing that helps you understand what the underground scene is all about, as well as the motivations of threat actors is really like what brings people to perform the crime they do. That's a very complicated subject by itself, but on the surface you can talk to the fact that money drives many things, that incentives like getting reputation or finding a better placement in wherever they happen to be at drives people to do things. They could be told to do things, such as a national level entity enforcing an action. It can be many things that drive this. It could just be part of their culture. There's a strong scam culture, for example, in a lot of the criminal elements that come out of different continents. It's built into it. That's how they make money. That's how their whole life is structured, and they don't necessarily see it as a bad thing. To them, it's no better or worse than bartering is to us. It's just something they do. Now, for us, we find that different. We have a different culture here in the US. So understand those nuances and realize how they impact things. There's no easy button for this. I've put a couple of starter links for you to dig into. And I'll make sure and scroll down to this other one. And they kind of go the vast direction of individual kind of attacks and understanding what threat actors are and why we call them that, to maybe some profiles that like we break down in sticks. What's organized crime, what's not. There's organized and disorganized, there's cybercrime and there's normal crime. There's all kinds of data, what's carding. Have at least topical level understanding of these topics when you go in. I realize that was redundant, but have a surface level of these topics under your belt so that you can go in and talk to them at a minimum, even if all you do is learn one or two of them. These are purposely chosen to be very beginner level or topical level understanding of each individual topic, and none of these links, actually, there's no very few at all, none of these links are detailed deep dives. The closest thing would be this Microsoft Digital Defense Report, which kind of comes out annually and digs into the weeds on a few things, and it gives you Microsoft's view of the industry. So hopefully you find this valuable. I'll probably do a few more of these as my past and present apprentices go through their job searches and try to find new positions, or as questions come in. If you want me to cover a part of a job application, put it in the comments. What I'll do is I'll put that in my queue and get to it as quickly as possible. If you need it by a certain time, make sure and throw that in there, and I'll do my best, though no guarantees. Anyway, I hope you find this helpful, and I look forward to talking to you in the future.